Hello and welcome to Everyday Oral Surgery. This is your host, Dr. Grant Stuckey. I am an oral and maxillofacial surgeon practicing in Denver, Colorado. The goal of this podcast is to connect, learn, and inspire. In this podcast, you'll be hearing from OMS surgeons all over the globe discussing ways to improve the practice of oral and maxillofacial surgery. Most information shared in this podcast will be based on personal experience and opinions, so please supplement what you learn here with approved research studies. Without further ado, please enjoy today's episode. Okay, welcome to another episode. Today I'm with Kathie Lumbard. She's an executive coach, and I'll let her talk a little bit more about that. But Kathie, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you, Dr. Stuckey. This is great. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, can you just give us just a brief history of your background and kind of what you do for work these days?
Sure. So as you said, I'm an executive coach. Gallup Strengths Coach is my certification. I'm a senior global consultant for Straumann and serve on the foundation board for Advent Health, which is about a 55 hospital system locations. They have about 55 locations in about 9 different states. So really focused in the last, I would say, 10 years. I've been in dentistry for over 25 years. So I'm kind of dating myself a little bit, but the focus really in the last, I would say 10 years, 7 to 10 years, has been more the leadership side, the people side of the business. And it was interesting because I think that back in the day when I was a rep, that's where I started. I started to lean into, and what I found is that most of my conversations were always shifting to people. So like all the challenges were never like the clinic. Like you want to be in there, and you want to talk about clinical stuff and cases and like get all excited, and that's like fun. But then when you go into what their challenges are, it wasn't the cases necessarily per se, because they had support and we had resources for that. It was the people side of it. So I really started to lean into that and saw a huge shift when COVID happened too. So I think we have all seen that. But so that's a little bit about my background. And after COVID, I really started to lean into it because I found that it was an area that people needed a lot of help with.
Nice. That's fantastic. Yeah, a prior guest of ours, Dr. Martell, he recommended we get you on the podcast. But this topic of people skills is something we've discussed in different ways on the podcast. And I think is just so critical for our success in surgery and dentistry and really any healthcare setting. But yeah, can you just, I guess, launch us off on that topic of the quote unquote soft skills and how we can improve those, I guess?
Yeah. No, I think that's great. First, I like to start with that I think soft skills are not soft. I think they're the hard skill. So it's interesting because I feel like it's the one common thing that I hear is like kind of the consistent issue, right? Is that there's challenges either with team members or patients or, and again, it's like all the people, but I'm like, okay, well, if there's this many people having the challenge, is it really soft? It seems like it might actually be harder than we think. And, part of it is the nature and the climate of where we are just in general as a human population on this earth and all the technology changes. So we're constantly bombarded with all kinds of different things and we're taxed. So I always like to say, okay, well, let's shift and call it the hard skill, not the soft skill, because it's the piece that we continually seem to battle. But when we think about just like from a behavioral science perspective, it's kind of interesting because there's 2 drivers of behavior, which is fear and trust. And I like to break it down super simple because when we look at that, it makes it really easy to kind of understand. And when we saw that with COVID too, right? So we were fear-based, everyone shut down and nothing moved forward, right? We weren't seeing patients, we weren't making money, we weren't going to the grocery store. It was bad, right? So, and it really, really affected the economy. It affected the people, our mental state, all these things. So fear is an interesting little piece from the brain and the way that we operate, because change is what drives fear. But trust allows us to move forward. And so I always say we want to create a trust-based environment. But for us to do that, we have to work with people differently because we're just in a different mental state than we were before. So I don't know. As far as, I think we kind of talked about this a little bit before, Dr. Stuckey, but what have you seen as far as at the practice level from the people side of it? Do you feel like it's team members, patients? Like, where do you see the challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we think of fear, we're thinking immediately of our patients, of course, in surgery because they're all freaked out of their mind, and
Yeah.
that manifests in many ways. Sometimes that comes out. We were talking about this a few episodes ago, just like the angry patient who comes in, they're upset about everything. They kind of just make a big scene, and everyone in the office gets so annoyed with them. And I think oftentimes we're not realizing that it's fear that's under the anger, and so sometimes identifying the fear and saying, well, let's take a step back here, because we usually think fear manifests with, nervousness, shaking, crying, all that type of stuff. But it's interesting that you talk about this in terms of our staff members and the people we work with, because I think that's could also be there, specifically when you're talking about trust, especially if people's trust has been maybe violated, or I mean, I think of confidential conversations that should have remained confidential. It somehow kind of got out, and then people feel hurt, and that trust is lost. That type of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and when we look at, some of the statistics around trust too, it's a little disheartening, but 77%, and this is a Gallup statistic. And if you're familiar with Gallup, you may have heard of like Gallup poll or what it might be, but they do some of the most extensive worldwide research on people, organizations, what allows organizations to be more successful than other organizations. So they're just very, very research heavy. But their recent statistic, and this number keeps going up year over year, is that 77% of individuals don't trust leadership.
Interesting.
So if you think about your team, or even like, and that's why, so if you think about it from a patient perspective, how many times have you provided some sort of guide or whatever, and then they'll ask the assistant, hey, what do you think? I mean, that happens. And you see that in the GP practice for sure, where they'll turn to the hygienist and say, what do you think? And I'm not trying to say that, that you have to have all the education to be the expert, but you're looking at someone who's had 10 or 12 years of school versus someone who's at, right. But they do that because, so we have to think about that too. And then we have to think about that from a team member perspective. So it does get more complicated. And again, because we're almost like we're in this over accessed, but under connected environment. So we're social media, right? We have however many platforms. I'm not very good at that, but I know that people are like on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and probably 10 other ones that I don't know about, LinkedIn or whatever it might be, constantly getting touched, over access. Also, they're getting their information that way. And then they come into us, and now we have to undo what they think they know based on, it's gotten so complicated because of the nature of how we communicate now. And communication is the number one reason why things fail every time. Whenever there's something that doesn't work, whenever I've worked with teams or leaders or whatever it might be, every single time we break it down, there was a communication component that was missing. And that's where the breakdown was. So yeah, and it's from when we think about, 77% of individuals don't trust leadership, but we have to have trust to drive things forward. And for those teams who are highly engaged and do have high trust, if we look at the business impact for the office, there's 10% more trust with patients. And I think we see that if you have, lower turnover, higher retention, then your patients are going to try because they see the same people. It's a comfort thing. It feels good. And so then you have higher trust with the patients, which means they say yes more often then you're more profitable. So you're more profitable because you don't have as, much turnover, which is also very expensive. But then also your patients are saying yes more because they see the same people, and there's consistency, because if you want to drive growth, there has to be consistency over time. So, and that's part of what, when we look at some of the business impacts, that's part of what Straumann does, the consulting and transformation team. because it's not just, the people side, there's a lot of other business components. It's very data heavy, data driven, but we bring the clinical and the operations and the teams and everyone together so that everyone's speaking the same language. And it's interesting because when you can bridge that communication gap, you can drive growth in a completely different way. But you're also growing the people. So that's why I was like, sometimes it's like we get hung up in the numbers and that comes, but the people are being elevated. Because I'm always like, we just want you to be better outside of the office too. I want you to be at dinner and be able to have an informed, intelligent conversation about something versus saying, well, I don't know, the doctor just does that. So, getting people to be on the same page. So we see that as far as a way to, bring them in when they are educated and elevated, then they tend to work better together and everything just sort of fits.
Yeah, I mean, do you have like power tips or something on how to improve trust on a team? Like, how do you coach people on that one?
Yes. I mean, one, I think, setting some very clear roles and expectations too, because that's the other component is that whenever I, sit down with individuals and learn about what it is that they do, and I ask them, what their roles or responsibilities are, if they have them outlined, a lot of times they don't. I'm not saying that's true for everyone, but a lot of times they don't. And so someone may be verbalized or they came in and it's kind of like on the job training, but there's no actual formal document that says, okay, this is kind of your core, but also with the understanding that you got to be able to flex. Because really what makes organizations and offices, and in particular on the services side, when you're, patient facing, is that adaptive piece. And so there's all these different quotients that we talk about. So we have the intelligence quotient, which is IQ. You're born with it. You can't make it more. It is what it is. So whatever you're given is what you have. And then you have your technical quotient. So all your clinical procedures that you do. And then we have the emotional quotient. And there's been a hard focus on that around like, do we have awareness? Are we really fully aware of how people receive us? How we're, what's going on and how other people. But now there's a new one that they're calling AQ, which is the adaptive quotient. And so what they're saying is that because we're in this constant sort of like change culture, because things are moving so quickly, that for individuals that can kind of just flex and go with the flow, and it doesn't have to be, this specific way. I mean, we have rules and, regulations there for a reason, but every once in a while we got to think outside the box. So for those individuals, and so helping teams be more adaptive and understanding like, yes, this is how we do it, but then what are the exceptions? How do we move into problem solving when it's not going exactly as planned? That is what allows us to be successful. Because sometimes we're just too rigid. So helping teams, just be and leading like a coach too. So I think we talked about this before when we met, but the tell do, that kind of it used to be so much easier because you could just go tell people what to do and then they go do it and you go do your thing and it's great and you didn't have to think about it. It's not where we're at anymore. People don't want to be controlled. They don't want to be told what to do. I would say that even for patients too, they don't want to be controlled. So even the way that we position, the way that we talk about treatments is also another area that is to be highlighted, just because people don't want to be told how to spend their money, right? So we have to kind of bring them down the line. And it's just different because it takes from a owner clinician perspective, it takes a little bit more time because you have to ask questions. When we move away from the tell do, you have to ask questions. So a team member comes to you and says they have this idea around whatever. A lot of times they're met with, that's not going to work. We've never done it like that. Whatever it might be, they're kind of met with the wall. But if you can meet them with the curiosity instead, it fosters a different type of, that's how you can kind of build some trust too. And that's same with the patient, right? So rather than telling them, like, that's not going to, asking them questions around, well, is it more important for this or this? Or how do you see this happening? Because this, if we do it this way, it's not going to work based on, whatever it might be. So I think, again, it takes a little bit more time versus just saying what we think, no, and drive it versus asking the questions.
Yeah, I've noticed that a lot too with patients and treatments. Like I think in the last few years, patients are really, I'm not sure what the word is, but curious. They want to know the reasons for everything. It's no longer good enough just to say, okay, Dr. Stuckey does wisdom tooth extraction, but with that, we do platelet rich fibrin and we do Exparel and these other treatments that help you with your healing. And people want to, they don't want to pay for any of that or anything that they don't understand. So they want to come back, they want to talk, they want to really get into the weeds about like the science behind things. And that's good with me. I mean, I think they should know that, and then they should be informed on what they're purchasing and what the treatment is that we're doing. But I think that's the old school way was, like a front desk person just says, yeah, Dr. Stuckey does this treatment and it's beneficial. So, either do it or don't. Now it's like, well, let's get you back. Let's talk about all these details and then you can decide if you want to do it. And it's interesting. So many patients ask the question, well, is this necessary? I want to know how necessary this is, like, is an implant necessary? Like,
Uh-huh.
it's a funny question because, it's not like the patient wants you to answer that with a yes or no, but that's like,
Yes. Yeah. You
is a molar implant necessary? It's like,
can't.
it's hard to say yes and, or no.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, there's a lot of gray there, right? Because it's like, can you still eat without this one tooth? Sure. But you're going to lose bone. And if you lose the bone and you want that tooth back, it's going to be really hard if we can do it. Right. So, and depending on how many teeth, it's like, I always think like when it comes to the full arch procedures too, it's interesting because that is like, from a psychological perspective, super intense because people don't know. They think they want all their teeth out, right? They hate their teeth. I want them all out. I actually have this with my cousin right now, and she's, my age. She's not very old. She's tired of her teeth. She wants to take them all out. And I'm just like, hold on a second. Let's talk about what this means. Because if you do that, at a minimum, you've got to have implants. Otherwise, you will not be eating again. You will have no function. So it's it's interesting because they don't know, but they also get all of this information online, which puts us in a position of having to answer a lot of questions for them. So it takes longer. So just we got to bring people down the line a little bit.
And I think it does build trust when you do say it and you explain and you
Mm-hmm.
say, here's what I recommend. Here's what I would do if I was in the chair.
Right.
Here's the reasons why a molar implant will benefit your life, and it will keep your chewing symmetrical and it will save your other teeth from getting overworn, and
Yes.
kind of going through all these points. And then they say, okay, yes, I see that. I'll go with that. Or I think I can hold off for now. And it's okay. Like, just I'm presenting the info and what you decide is what we're going to go with, that type of a thing. It's a
Yeah.
trust building experience for both of
Right.
us.
Well, and then they become like your best, billboard, right? Because then they say, "Oh, Dr. Stuckey went through and explained it all to me, and he was like super comprehensive, and he went through all the information, like it didn't feel rushed, And so that always like helps for all the other conversations that happen. Because I always say, like, whatever happens in the office, you have to say, okay, how is that going to affect? What do we want to happen out of the office? Because we're always so focused on what's happening right there in front of us. But there's always these like kind of side effect things that we don't even think about, the conversations that are happening at dinner or, at a school function, or somebody like comes up with whatever. And then it's like, oh, well, who did you use or whatever it might be. So, so it's super important just to kind of like slow down in this very fast environment and have the conversation.
Yep, for sure.
I have a funny story. It's a little bit more on the self-awareness side of things, but I had a practice where they had 5 different locations, specialty practice, and there were two. They were all doing things a little bit different, which is fine, but it was disjointed, right? So we're trying to figure out, okay, like what are the what's best practices? How can we bring everyone together? There were two offices that like just really butted heads. I mean, they just like, and I couldn't figure it out because quite honestly, they were both great. I'm like, you guys are both, and I never said anything. Like that's the one thing I will say is like, I just listened. So I never said anything. I would go in and they would just have all these opinions about, the other office. And then I'd go in the other office and I'm like, you guys, like, you're both like doing so many great things. Why are you so stuck on what's wrong? Like it was just like in the way. Because when we focus on what's wrong, it kind of goes back to that fear and we can't move forward. I'm like, let's focus on what's right. Anyway, so I didn't say anything because I'm not going to take sides. I don't want to get in the middle of any of that. So what I did, I just said, hey, and the owner was actually he was open to it, which is great. But I said, hey, I would like to swap offices. This is like wife swap, but it's with offices instead. And so I just said, hey guys, as we're going through and understanding how we can work better together, I'm going to need you guys to spend a week in each other's offices. So we swapped them offices, and so they were able to see it from the other person's perspective, because things that they would say were challenges or whatever, they'd be like, oh, well, that can't be right. They just must be doing this wrong. And that they had all these judgments and assumptions. And what was funny is that when they swapped and they were in each other's seats, they totally shifted. They completely they're like, oh, wow, this is way different over here. I'm like, yes, that's why they're doing it. But I didn't want to be the person saying it, right? So they literally figured it out through this just this little shift that we did. They did it for a week. They took notes. We came back, they shared notes, and then they started calling each other and saying, okay, how would you do this? How would you do that? And they started going to lunch together. So it was interesting because that just goes back to you can't tell people what to think, right? So if you can get kind of creative in the way that you help them see the information, and sometimes that's just being in the other person's shoes. Because I always say that, and I think I learned this over time. I think early in my life, I think I had very strong assumptions and judgments about people. And what I realized is that you don't know what you don't know. So you can make assumptions about things, but if you haven't walked in those shoes, you can't know what that is exactly. So so it's interesting, but I think that awareness piece, because then it just leveled everything out. Then we were actually talking, right? Because the communication piece, it's like we got to communicate in order to get things to move forward. So it ended up working out. But I love that story because to see the shift in them was just it was super interesting.
That
and
is
I
awesome.
think and I think they were, I think they were both better for it. So that was fun.
What do you foster, a feedback rich environment, a safe place for people to say what they're thinking and feeling?
Yeah, I think it's really, really important, but I also think I know it sounds a little bit cheesy, but you guys as clinicians, as the oral surgeon in the practice, you are the celebrity. So everything that you do, you're on a pedestal, right? So you tell somebody that they did a great whatever is going to hold more weight than another team member saying, hey, great, good job on this. That they're going to care more when you do that. And so letting them see you just as a normal person that also can make mistakes too. So owning some of the I could have done this better kind of thing, it will allow them to see oh, okay, I don't have to be perfect. And so I think that really helps. And then also just asking. I will say one of the things that I have noticed is that we will provide recognition how we think people want to receive it, but we never ask them how they want it. So I saw this, and it wasn't I've been in dentistry for 25 years, but the last 10, because of my focus, I've been pulled into some other industries as well. And there was a healthcare education company that I was working with, and it was interesting because there was one leader that was constantly giving her people time off. So hey, great job, take the afternoon off. And they actually hated it. But she didn't know that, because we went through the whole, as we're going through the conversation, I was going to go, some of our core things is how do you recognize your people? Is that how you know that they want to be recognized? But it was just interesting because whenever we go through that exercise, and then people will tell you, well, I actually hate it when you when you do this, you're like, oh my gosh, this whole time I thought I was like giving you a pat on the back. And it's like, so, but again, but what is it? That's communication. We just literally didn't have the conversation. It always keeps coming back to communication. So yeah, so I think, allowing yourself to look just like a normal human that also can make mistakes. Again, it's different when when you're performing surgery. We don't like clearly, but just like outside of that, I mean, it's just like, yes, okay, I'm normal. Or, even like if you felt like you could have approached something differently, just kind of owning that will allow them to see like, oh, okay, like he's put some thought into that, or it's, then it's okay for them to say, yeah, I maybe should have thought about that differently. So you're kind of leading the way for them to have that conversation the same way.
I like that a lot. Awesome. So what are some practical takeaways here? I mean, you've talked about a lot of good stuff, but where would you kind of lead us next?
So there's a number of different, and I think we've talked about some of it just kind of woven throughout the conversation. I think the one obvious one is the morning huddle. I don't know. Do you guys do morning huddles at your office?
We usually do an afternoon huddle, but yeah. I like the morning.
Yeah, either way, it doesn't matter. I think as long as you have a huddle, because I will say that is also something I'm surprised, because there's still a lot of offices that don't do that. And just that like kind of check-in, but even beyond, because even the afternoon one's great because you could talk about, past, challenges that have already been throughout the day and potential things that are coming forward. But beyond the cases, always, what challenges do you foresee coming up? Also just getting a little bit more intentional with patients. So I always say, one of the best ways to make people feel important is use their name. And that's something that we don't, always do, but just being super intentional about that, whether it's a team member or a patient. And I don't know, it takes a little bit more effort to like really, think about that, but thinking about patients from how are we going to, and then I don't know if there's, goals too are always good to review as far as like, what are the expectations? Like, what are the outcomes for the day that we expect to happen? Because you want to be able to measure back, okay, did we get there? Did we do that? And is there anything that we could do better next time?
And that's stuff that you address in the morning huddle, your goals, issues in the past. I mean, you're talking about, I'm sure, your day and how to run it smoothly. Anything else you mentioned in the huddle?
So cases, potential challenges, bottlenecks, patients, as far as like, if there's anyone that you can address with maybe, even if it's like, it's always helpful. Like if so, say, Susie's daughter was sick and, whatever, and you guys know that, it's a really great opportunity for to say, hey, just as a reminder, Susie's daughter's better now. She went through whatever treatment, or she broke her arm, but she like whatever it is. And so when she comes in, you can say, hey, how's your daughter's arm? So, because now it's like, oh, okay, you were like really paying attention. And it requires people to help you do that. I mean, even when I go to like certain events or whatever it might be, I am pulling up a roster and going through everyone's name just so I can remember who it is, because I can see faces, but I don't always remember the names. And so I have to go through and like be very intentional about trying to remember people so that I can, so it takes some work. It doesn't just, some people I guess are natural at it, but I don't think, I think there's people that actually put work into it too.
I like that.
And another thing to do from just like an operational awareness piece is, so tell me about your day as far as, when you go to the office, do you park in the same spot? Do you go into the same door? How do you enter the office?
Of course, yes. I'm a man of routine, so I park in the same spot, going through the back door.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So that would be the only thing. So that would be a recommendation. And I will tell you, there's a lot of, you will see it differently, but if you can come in a different door, you can still park in the same spot. So we won't take that away from you, but come into a different door and just see what you see. Because oftentimes we're kind of in and out of our own same. So we see exactly what we're kind of siloed. And then when we start coming in from different areas, you kind of look around and you're like, oh, I didn't know that was there. Or I didn't know, or, then it also forces you to engage with different people in the office differently. Because typically when you're coming in the back, you're engaging with the clinical team, the assistants and whatever. But if you're coming in through the front, you're going to be talking to the office manager or whatever. So it allows you to divide your time a little bit more evenly so that we're not not saying you're playing favorites, but just again, you're a celebrity, right? So how do you sprinkle your time in? Because it's exhausting, quite honestly, just coming in through different doors to talk to people differently, and then also just see the office differently.
Occasionally too in our huddles, I like doing some type of inspirational quote, or
Oh
even
yeah.
just, even just like a statement about like, we're blessed to be doing this for a living, and like saving lives, so to speak, and helping people, because sometimes we just forget that like this is a great profession. And I also do like going around sometimes too and saying, what's the word, like one excellent thing about each person in the huddle. And I say it, like, I loved how so and so did this the other day, and they're so good with patience and calming people down, and so is great at, hyping up the team. And I love doing those things every now and then too, kind of taking a time out and just like celebrating people individually is
Yes.
something they seem to like.
Yeah, no, I love that. And that's like, I mean, that's spot on. And that really, because sometimes what happens is we'll just say, like, hey, good job. But if we can be more intentional and say, like, hey, you did a really great job calming that patient down. Now we're being very specific about what the behavior was. And
Yeah.
that is received differently than just, hey, good job. Because like, okay, good job, what? Good job showing up today, or what, right? So I love that you do that, because that's another kind of key component as well, is just being super intentional. And the other piece for the from a just building trust perspective too, is also the other side, like the constructive criticism, and giving that like in real time. And that's the biggest challenge. What typically will happen is it will build. So we'll see something that didn't go well, and we're like, and then it'll happen again, and then it'll happen. And then like after the third time, we say, hey, this isn't working, like, and then they're just like, oh my gosh. And then they feel worse. Where if it's just like addressed in the minute, in the moment, then they're like, oh yeah, cool, got it. And what we find, even like you can see this in Harvard Business Review, that we don't like to give we don't like to give constructive feedback because it makes us feel bad. But people want it. They actually want it. What they don't want is for it to build up over, a month or two. And then all of a sudden it becomes like, you're terrible at this. And they're like, well, I didn't even know I was terrible at that. Nobody told me. So, so that would be the other thing I would say is, not as natural, because we tend to kind of give people passes. We're like, oh, okay, maybe it's just a bad day or whatever. But if you can address it in the moment, in the minute, then that's helpful.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned how soft skills are some of the harder skills to cultivate. I think we don't really get like formal, training in dentistry or surgery. And usually it's all kind of indirect training. We're just kind of mirroring some of the behaviors that our program chairman and directors and professors and things did toward us. And as we know, residency training and the social aspect there can be very dysfunctional. And so I think it's helpful to have these discussions on how to improve your soft skills with people.
Right. Yeah, it's way better out of school, right?
Yeah.
They definitely put you through a lot. So yeah, no, that's great. And I find that, I know you said Vic had introduced us, and was super appreciative for the introduction, but it was just interesting, even whenever I was, working with Vic, a lot of the growth that we saw wasn't because of, the clinical piece, the comprehensive clinical piece was super helpful, but it also was driving communication, which again tends to be the breakdown. But then he also would bring the team members in. So it was just, again, it kind of goes back to, that's why Straumann has their consulting and transformation team now, because there's such a need to pull it all together, not just this one thing, but the whole business, from the clinical to team to the operational.
And is that meant more for like relationships between like a specialist and a referring doctor, a generalist, or is that meant to be like intra practice, where you're going into a practice and helping the individuals who work together? Or what is Straumann doing there?
So what we do is we work with the various practices on different strategies. So we always start with some sort of data pull, and depending on what the need and ask is, the data pull might be more comprehensive. So we start with the data pull, and then we say, okay, based on this information, where can we drive growth and impact? And then our programs are essentially focused on very specific areas. So it could be case acceptance, it could be referral strategy, and it looks different. So if it's full arch, referral strategy is very different. And the challenge is that just to be a really, really good clinician can't be the bar anymore, because that is the standard, right? We want everybody to do exceptional work. So how are we working with referrals and elevating them? But we're doing it through data, we're doing it through strategy, but then we bring the teams together. Because that's the other piece too that we see oftentimes is that, we'll get some clinical training, but then we don't have support in the back end from the teams in order to have the actual pull through. And so that's, again, that's kind of how, Straumann's bringing it all together is pulling it all together through one very specific strategy. But then we go in and we train the teams. If there's a clinical component, that's usually handled by our clinical team. And then we do the ongoing coaching along the way too. Typically what we see is if you just go to a class and then you come out and you try to implement it, it's not as successful as if you have ongoing recurring engagement. So we do not just the program introduction and the education, but we do the ongoing coaching all along the way. And sometimes, and it depends, sometimes it's just leadership, sometimes it's leadership and teams, sometimes it's just team. And that's the thing about consulting, is that it just depends on what the practice needs. So, but really it's just to elevate everybody and bring everybody in a position, because in particular, with case acceptance, that seems to be a really, really big one. And we don't realize, oftentimes when patients aren't saying yes, sometimes it's just because of how we're telling them. Because again, it goes back to the psychological piece. So if we tell them what the whole treatment plan is, if we say, okay, these 2 implants are going to be $8,000, but we have this payment plan for you, they've already said, I'm not paying $8,000. That's what their brain has said. You've hijacked them already. And if we can just flip the script a little bit, right? So if we can say, okay, it looks like looks like you have a couple of implants that they talked about. If you're interested in treatment, it's going to start at around $200 a month. Now the brain has said, oh, okay, I need this. I have buy-in because I already had that, the discussion with Dr. Stuckey. And so he's giving me everything. I want to do this. It's only $200 a month. I can do that. And then they see the full amount. That's a different process for the brain to go through. And oftentimes there's just little nuance, inverse things that we can and so we do lots of role play and constant coaching and, constant quizzing and that sort of thing, because adult learning is repetition over time. And we have to have consistency over time. And sending somebody to an intensive 1-day class and then coming back and saying, implement it, it just doesn't happen. So what they do is they get they get elevated, they have some team bonding, they do some so they might get a little bit closer as a team, but then to actually come in and use the skills at the max capacity doesn't happen. So we just kind of combine it all, but then provide all the coaching along the way.
Wow, what a great service to offer. That's great. Excellent.
Good.
Yeah, I appreciate your time. We actually end every episode with some rapid fire questions. So,
oh boy.
Let's see what your thoughts are here. They're very easy questions. One is, what's the best book you've read in the past year?
The Future is Faster Than You Think.
Okay. Tell us about that. Why was it good? I
think it's scary, for one, because it does talk about how quickly technology is changing, and what we know as our capabilities is what they have the ability to do is way beyond where our heads are ready to process. So it's interesting because I talk about change and being hijacked and whatever, and you read this book and you're kind of going holy smokes, there's a lot going on, but they can't even bring it to us right now because we can't handle it. So, so it's an interesting book.
Very cool.
I also love, can I give you one more?
Yeah.
Okay. I also love the let them theory. Are you familiar with that one?
Sorry, what was that again?
The let them theory.
Yeah, I've heard many good things about it. Why did you like that one?
Because it kind of goes into that emotional intelligence piece, and it goes into the control piece. Because I always say focus on what you can control, because oftentimes people are getting sideways because it's something they're upset about, but it's they're really focused on the thing that they can't. I'm always like, focus on what you can do. What can you do in this moment? What do you actually have the ability to do? And it's like, when we do that, then we can move forward, right? And then we can get past the anger and the whatever. But I love, like, it's just because it talks about social media, it talks about professional relationships, it talks about personal relationships, but it's just really about the element of, like, we can't control, right? And just let them. And so it's like a weight is lifted off your shoulders when you read the book, because then you see things and you're like, yeah, okay, that's a you thing. I'll let you go do that, and I'm going to move on because I don't have the energy. Yeah, helps you channel your energy in the right way.
How about best movie or TV series you've seen in the past year?
Oh my gosh, that's kind of a hard one. I gotta be honest, I do not watch a lot of TV. Oh, best movie. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I just saw it was a true story about a rowing team. Can't remember the name of it.
Okay.
But it was like back in the 50s, I think. And
The Boys in the Boat, or no?
yeah, I think that is it. Yeah, I think that is it.
There was a movie, I think a year or two ago, The Boys in the Boat, that was made about those guys. They're from Washington.
That's it.
Yeah.
No, I just watched that and I loved it. I thought it was a really, really, really great story. But it also goes back to, like, hard work and, putting your time in. And it was an interesting, and also it's kind of like a underdog story, right? We always like it when kind of the underdogs are the ones that are leading the way. So yeah.
Oh, for sure. And then how about favorite quote? Do you have a favorite quote or a saying?
I think, well, this is like from, Don Clifton, who was the father of positive psychology for Gallup. But really, he said, what happens if we focus on what's right versus what's wrong? And that's where it goes back to, like, that's why I always go back to, like, why are we focusing on what's wrong? Let's focus on what's right to create the clarity. And then we can go back and fix the things that are wrong, right? So I think that focusing on what's right versus what's wrong is kind of the way that I sort of try to live by as all these things get thrown your way.
Yes, that's awesome. Excellent. Well, and real quick, because usually we'll ask what's your power parenting tip? Do you have kids? Do you have any parents?
I do. I have 2 girls.
Oh, nice.
Yes, I know, right? Yeah. Which is funny because I really hate drama, and somehow I ended up with 2 girls. So, and I have one that's 11 and one that's 13. So they're pretty much kind of like teenagers right now, which is super fun. Yeah. So pro parenting tip. Interestingly, I do think that, I just try to ask questions again, whenever they, have something that comes up, or like some feeling that they're having. I just ask them questions, which sometimes they get annoyed, where they're just like, can I just tell you something and you not try to drill into it? But I think the more you can ask questions and not make assumptions, because I think oftentimes, like, we make assumptions about things. The other thing that I do is I do a check-in. So every 6 months, I'll ask them, like, how am I doing? Right. This kind of goes back to, like, that recognition thing. But I'll be like, how am I doing as a parent? And so every once in a while I'll get feedback. Like, my daughter's a competitive gymnast, and I used to always kind of like hype her up, I'd be like, hey, you're going to do really great at this meet. And, like, you got this whole cheerleader thing. And I had asked her, I think it was right after one of her meets, so how am I doing? We were at a meet, we were out of town. She's like, I really hate it when you do that. It makes me more nervous. And I was like, oh my gosh, it has the exact opposite effect of what I was hoping to do. So now I say nothing. I don't give her any praise. I just let her do her thing. Yeah. I think a check-in with your kids, or, even your spouse, is always a good thing.
Yes. Yeah. The power of just questions is so amazing. And stopping and asking questions, especially with your kids. I feel like more often than not, a lot of parents we're just telling them to do stuff, clean your room, go do this.
Yes, that's how they. Once in a while, though, you kind of have to, like, every once in a while, because I do feel like I explain myself a lot. Like, why? Because, and sometimes I'm like, because I asked you to, please just go do it. Do you have kids?
Yeah, I have 3 girls and 3 boys. So lots of opportunity for learning things.
Wow. Yes, that's a lot. Yep, you do. Lots of opportunity. Well, good.
It is good. Yeah. Thank you for answering those questions and for, sharing that information about just how to improve your people skills and improve the trust in your office and things like that. I think can only benefit all of us. So that's a good topic.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. Have a great vacation. I know you're getting ready to head out. So
Thank you. And then I will put, if you're good with it, I can put your contact information in our show notes. So if anyone has further questions, they could reach out to you. Is that okay?
yeah, yep, that's great.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
All right, bye. Thank you.
See ya. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Everyday Oral Surgery. For more information on these podcasts, please visit everydayoralsurgery.com. I love feedback and would be very grateful if you would reach out to me via my email, grantstuckey@gmail.com, and let me know what you thought of this episode. Or you can text me at 720-441-6059. Additionally, if you have any topics you'd like to hear about, or if you would like to be a guest on the podcast, please email or text me. I found many of my interviewees through people who have been contacting me and have been listening, and I've gotten so many great ideas for more podcasts, and that's what helps keep the podcast rolling. So I really appreciate you making that extra effort and helping me out with feedback and knowing what to do next on the podcast. Thank you so much.